The Chicago Huntsmen have officially announced the acquisition of Prestinni, previously of the Florida Mutineers. Prestinni takes the place of Gunless, and according to Hex on Twitter, they are still in the process of trying to find Gunless a new home. All right, this has been a move that's been rumored for a while, and it's been a move that's been talked about and rumored for a decent amount of time. Originally, when we saw the Chicago Huntsmen noticeably on stream beginning to bicker, the idea at the time was tossed around, hey, I wonder if they'd ever take a look at someone like Prestinni, right? He at the time had benched himself on the Florida Mutineers for what was labeled as personal reasons. There was rumors of whether he would return, whether he wouldn't. Personally, I never saw him return to the Florida Mutineers because I don't think he wanted to be or go back to this Mutineers team. I think his best case scenario, kind of coming into the year and maybe even post that, at least in terms of whenever this kind of benching situation was going on, I think his best case scenario was always to be in Chicago with his brother. I just don't think he meshed with this team, right? And the reason why I said that and believe that is because there was no sign of struggle when Prestinni was benched, right? There was nothing going on social media. There was no Twitch clip, no Reddit post about his anger by not getting back on the starting lineup. There was also no real update given from Florida on whether or not Farrow was a substitute or not, right? Is he on the team officially? Is Prestinni going to be on the bench permanently? And something that struck me was the talk the Mutineer players had about Farrow, talking on how great he was on the team, how he's taught this team how to play differently, how the entire morale, the entire mentality of this team is totally different. It just appeared that Florida had found their man, and Prestinni made that deal much easier because I don't believe he wanted to be there. And I think one of the primary reasons for that was the quote that I gave as soon as we saw the Florida Mutineers reverse sweep the Chicago Huntsmen in Atlanta, right? The win Prestinni got was the one thing he wanted to do and the one thing he didn't want to do. As the one player on E United who never really got the credit, right? As the one player from the E United Call of Duty Championship team who was picked up last in the offseason, who was the one brother of the twin duo who was never really given the spotlight. He wanted to prove he didn't need Arcitys to win. And I believe in that moment, that shock, it hit him, right? The one thing he wanted to do, the one thing he wanted to prove was that he could win, was to prove people wrong. And if it meant going through his brother, so be it. And once he realized that the one thing he wanted was also the one thing he didn't want, the last person he wanted to beat was his brother, I think it hit him. And that clearly was not just an emotional moment for the players themselves. It was also a very emotional moment for the family, right? An incredibly close one. They came up on the scene together, obviously, for these two brothers. They won together. They had never been on different teams. It was hard, right? It wasn't what they wanted. Now, it became incredibly apparent to me around, I would say, this time last week, that this deal was most likely coming, right? I tweeted, I expected this move to occur. I'd be surprised if we don't see Prestinni on Chicago before the Seattle home series. Obviously, we got a chance to watch General sub in and play some scrims, but that kind of told me, Gunless, he's out the door. He's not going to be utilized for this team, especially when we saw General getting used consistently day after day after day. I think they were interested in seeing how General played and kind of wanted to prep him in case they couldn't get the deal done ahead of Seattle. And as great as a player General is or could have been for this team, it just isn't his role, right? It's hard to teach what has previously been a main AR a totally different role with an SMG, and probably one where they need him to play a lot faster than he's comfortable with. You've already got Arcitys, you've already got Formal on this team who like to run the ARs or who can run the ARs. It was just never going to be an easy spot for General to try and dive into a role he's not comfortable with, and to try and dive in a role that this team doesn't necessarily need. All right, let's go and talk on details, right? From what we know about this move, Chicago has bought out Prestinni's contract from Florida, and that's kind of it, right? Florida does not get Gunless. They get no assets as far as we know right now outside of the contract buyout. Again, like I said, that's what we know for now. So the question remains, as we do with every single move, who won the deal, right? Who won this deal? Is it Chicago? Is it Florida? Who got out better? in this one. And obviously, it's hard because we don't know, right? The contract bio. We don't know what Chicago paid Florida for Prestinni, but from an outside point of view, it does look good for the Huntsmen. Now, like I said, depending on the amount of money Chicago gave for Prestinni, I actually do think both teams kind of got what they wanted, right? Now, the reason why I think Florida gets off somewhat okay, despite many others' beliefs on this, is that I don't think that they wanted to use Prestinni, right? And that's been a big thing for a lot of people is, well, you're talking about Mox. Mox kind of is in rumors about not starting for this team anymore. Prestinni could have been that person. I think there has to be a disconnect here because it makes too much sense for Florida to keep him at this point, right? Think about it. Florida brings back Prestinni as a fast SMG. The last time he played, they managed to get Florida to push to a second place finish at the Atlanta home series. The role makes sense. He's played well for them previously. Why would you not want to use him, right? Why would you want to give him to a competitor? It would make no sense, right? If you're the Mutineers, why in the world would this make sense to do? I believe the reason for that is because the players or the organization, Prestinni with Florida, however it works, they have a disconnect. Like I said, it makes far too much sense for him to use him, right? All the people that are saying this is a bad move for Florida, right? They should have kept him because they're just giving their competition better players. Totally makes sense. And I think the reason why they moved him was because they knew they're not going to get anything more out of him. Because what everyone's talk is absolutely legitimate. But I think there must be a reason, at least in my eyes. So Florida, if they get some good money here, they manage to give an asset that they aren't going to use to a team that was probably willing to pay a healthy amount for him. You kind of like that, right? Florida is also rumored to be going for a young amateur player, an awakening, a guy that I've been able to watch for a little bit now, a player who's been on Team 6th Gear throughout Modern Warfare. If they are able to bring him in for Mox, you are getting then a good amateur player on a lower salary while also making some good money, I'm assuming, on Prestinni. So I think then in reality, it's kind of best case for Florida. Outside of not getting gunless, you don't want to let Prestinni sit and devalue, especially because this is a team in Chicago that on all accounts wants him. And he's valued still very highly, right? His last time we saw him, he was finishing second. He was playing well. I like the move for Florida, right? We can talk about the gunless thing here in a little while, but I think in terms of the way that they were able to move him out, I think is actually a good move, especially because this is a team in the Huntsmen that really wants him. Now, speaking of the Huntsmen, this move for Chicago also makes sense. I talked about this last week. First off, based on the meta, why not, right? I mean, Modern Warfare only feels like it's getting faster. And again, an SMG like Prestinni makes perfect sense for that. Envoy has the ability for more freedom now to kind of do what he wants around the map. As Prestinni, should be pushing out lanes, helping in search and destroy. He'll be a player that does the dirty work for a team that really needs that right now. So role-wise, this checks out perfectly, right? This is the role that you want filled if you're Chicago. Secondly, chemistry, right? This is going to change up the dynamic of the Huntsmen drastically. You're bringing in Arcitys' twin brother. They should be in better spirits, and I think this will work out based on an in-game basis much, much better. This is the move and probably the only move that either team could make in this moment. Now, the big piece, right? Gunless doesn't get moved. Chicago are still holding on to him. I don't think Florida wanted Gunless. I'll be honest. I don't think they really did. Now, would they like to maybe acquire him to later move him elsewhere? Probably. But he becomes, if he joins the Mutineers, he becomes a high priority, a high salary player. And I don't believe that's the direction this team wants to go, right? Florida gets out cheaper with a player that's going to play, or that rather for a player that's not going to play for them in Prestinni. And they possibly get better with an amateur player, which has worked for many, many teams, especially the subliners as of recent. And Chicago at the same time, they get a piece they want, and they also get to keep Gunless, of which they can sell to another team. Now, quickly, on the topic of Gunless, I do want to point out, this doesn't look good for him, right? This doesn't look good on Gunless whatsoever, because we're starting to notice a pattern, right? We're starting to notice a pattern with him. Win early, start to lose, controversy, internal problems, later leading to Gunless being benched in some capacity. I know when I mentioned Gunless has gotten benched 3 times, everyone started to freak out, said, oh my gosh, you have to realize Gunless benched himself. Still has been benched 3 times, right? Still has been on the bench 3 times. While he does have a history with winning, that short-term success isn't built for franchises, right? Franchises want to win, but they're also focused on stability. Constantly having to issue in and issue out pieces is at an all-time low in terms of what teams want to do. Whichever team that Gunless will join next, it will be massively important for him to make a lasting impression. I think Gunless has the ability to see a move be made. I think OGLA at first glance is the one that strikes me. From the organization's point of view, I don't know if that's feasible, but I think Slasher wants to be with him. Obviously, we talked about a majority of those guys have played together previously. We could see teams like Seattle take a look, but we know previously that it hasn't really been the ideal spot in terms of what players do they want to play with Gunless. It hasn't really looked as if that's the case, but I think we will see teams start to make moves for him very soon. But this entire situation, I've been saying this is going to happen since they formed, right? This isn't for me anything that I didn't expect, right? As soon as the Chicago Huntsmen were announced, I didn't think that they'd last the entire season, right? I made that very well known. I thought they had too many voices, too many opinionated players, too many dominant personalities. I mentioned the example, the crack in the windshield, right? The Huntsmen, they were out driving at some point. A word was said, a series was lost, an event wasn't won, and a crack formed. And it has spread day by day by day, right? The losses to Florida, the close games with bad teams, the interviews with Arcitys talking about teammates not waking up on time, that they don't know how to play the game correctly, the lack of practice and focus coming into their home series. When I said, wake up, Chicago, you got teams that are right on your heels. You might have to worry about the subliners. You have to worry about FaZe. You have to worry about Empire. I said that would be the biggest crack yet. And what happens? They lose. They watch their rivals on the season go on to play for their home series championship. And they lose to their ultimate rival, the team that they've been dominating all season. What happened to walk away with one of the best series that they've had on the year versus Chicago, the Dallas Empire, right? To say I'm surprised about this move would be a lie, right? This has been expected for a while. This move has been looming for months. The chemistry wasn't there. The atmosphere wasn't there. The players clearly weren't checked in anymore. This is a move that was expected. The Huntsmen were in need of a change, and it'll be interesting to see if more are to come ahead of what should be a very exciting Seattle home series.